Hey, I'm still trying to figure out this setup. Maybe this is a little bit better? I don't know. I want to talk about how I'm a failure. I feel like this is something I just want to get off my chest mainly because this is kind of most recently wrapped up for me and I just, need to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about my first ever screenplay, how I got to finishing it, where it took me, and my future with screenwriting. Mainly because I want to be a screenwriter, and I think this is just something I want to talk about. So, without further ado, I made some points because I don't use scripts for my videos. I like these to be more freehand and just talking about whatever comes to my mind. I like to be honest with y'all. And I also realized my camera. Am I looking at my camera? I'm realizing I'm looking at the wrong side. But it's, I don't know, whatever helps, I guess. That's how discombobulated I am. But yeah, my first ever screenplay. So, like I said, I've always wanted to be a screenwriter, and my problem was up before I started grad school back in 2018. I would try to write stuff, but I just would never commit to it. The stories would be very weak, but I wouldn't know why. I focused more on plot than the characters itself, and that's still kind of a problem I have. But it was just a whole bunch of mixtures where nothing I was writing just worked, or I wasn't even given the right guidance because the screenwriting teachers I had at that time, not the teachers I liked, but I've had some bad ones where they just wouldn't support my kind of ideas and what I wanted was screenwriting. Just what I was putting out there was garbage. A lot of it was just cringy, immature stuff. But I ended up going to grad school in 2018 at American University because I just felt like I really wanted to focus on my portfolio. And I told myself, I was like, if I'm gonna, put my stuff out there, I'm gonna put as much effort as I can into making something that's actually worthwhile and stuff. So that's when I said, I'm gonna focus mostly on screenwriting when I'm down here and see what happens. This is my time, my opportunity to see if it works out or whatever. And it turns out I was focusing a lot on writing, mostly because the pandemic kind of ruined me touching any sort of film equipment back home. But yeah, I focused mostly on screenwriting. And the big thing is I had a very supportive group of teachers willing to help, develop my creativity, put it down a certain path and be like, hey, this is what you need to do. They had this thing where it's any idea is not a stupid idea. So you just have to develop on it. And I really liked that mentality. I liked getting to a point where I could make my ideas actually make sense in a, storytelling way. I worked mostly on my characters and stuff. And I just felt significantly more confident. Because of the pandemic, I was stuck at home. And one thing that we ended up having to do in order to get your diploma, one path you can go is essentially your thesis, where you work on a project for a whole semester or two, and that project is essentially your calling card. You can put it out to the world and be like, hey, this is what I can do. I decided to write my first ever feature-length screenplay for that class, and while I was doing that, I was also taking a class just focusing on writing screenplays, features specifically. So for my last semester, and the years are all jumbled in my head. My last semester, the fall 2020 semester. Yeah. I started grad school in 2019, not 2018. Oh my god, the years are jumbled up. Yeah, for my last semester, fall 2020, I was going to write two screenplays, two feature-length screenplays. And I'm going to focus mostly on the one that was my first that I actually ended up putting out into the world. And that one is called Recidivism. To start off, it was actually originally called Greyhound, but Tom Hanks had a different idea, and I ended up changing it to Recidivism. I can't recall why I picked that word. I think I just looked up the definition, I spelled out what I was trying, thinking of what it meant, and I got that word. And I was like, that kind of sounds pretty cool. I don't really know of any movies called that. The word is never mentioned in the screenplay, but it should be. And later on, I'm going to talk about the novel version because the word is in the novel version. The original idea came so I don't drive and I don't like flying. My home is back in Buffalo, New York, and American University is in Washington, D.C. I would always take a Greyhound bus from D.C. back to Buffalo to get back home. During those trips, I think with Greyhound, you meet a lot of interesting people in terms of people going through really tumultuous points in their life where I would overhear people arguing on the phone with loved ones. People talk about like addictions and stuff. And pretty much when you're cutting through Pennsylvania going back up, it's just a barren wasteland. And even like upstate New York where I'm from, it's just trees everywhere, nature, but like there'd be like rust, decay, all this kind of thing, which sounds really depressing, but like that's just kind of the reality of it. It's part of the Rust Belt, and that's what that kind of thing I would be exposed to. And like just out of boredom, because like the trip would always be long, I would just start thinking of like my surroundings, the people I was around, what I was seeing, and being like, I just would think about like their situations, why they were taking a bus up here, and then that's where like I think like that kind of general idea of recidivism kind of kicked in, where I was like, I kind of want to write about a character going from one place to another through this kind of transportation, but like they had like a hard life. They get stuck in like this really harder situation, and at the end like they get out of it, but like it's a whole kind of transformation period for them. Because like a lot of the topics I overheard mainly had to do with like drugs, I started thinking of the main character being like a drug addict and these kind of things, mainly because that's all I would hear on this bus, and that's something I kind of like associated with the trips going back up, which I feel like is really scummy the more I'm saying it out loud, but I don't know, it's just like something that would just stick with me. So I ended up writing the screenplay where I was thinking of this character who was a drug addict escaping essentially his like caretakers in this halfway house, only for them to accidentally join a drug smuggling gang up north in upstate New York. And I just wrote, it's like this weird kind of like feud that goes on throughout it and stuff with the one drug smuggling gang and another one. It was probably at that point the most normal line of action I would have in one of my stories, in the sense that like I usually like the like absurdist kind of surreal things, kind of like David Lynch stuff, on top of like some Stanley Kubrick stuff too, which that's more in depth. But like I don't know, a lot of my ideas I tend to like get from like dreams and stuff, or just like really bizarre incidences in my life. This one was just like it was probably the most straightforward. And a reason why I kind of did that too, because obviously I've never written a screenplay up to that point, but like this one requirement we had was like we couldn't go over 100 pages if we were doing screenplays, and we could, it had to be at least 90 pages, but we couldn't go over 100. And I just felt like it would have been a lot easier to do something just more straightforward, so I can get in between those requirements. It ended up being 93 pages, and I mean I think for what it is, granted, you know, it's not the most impressive screenplay out there, but like for a first time finished work, I thought it was pretty good. Like, you know, it's not great, and again, it's my first ever screenplay that's like front to back, you know, a feature length. But I was proud of it, and I had a lot of supportive teachers at that time. Really helped me uh, hone in on my craft and stuff. So I am definitely grateful to them. If I ever win an Oscar, I will totally thank them in the speech. But that's if I ever win one, which might never happen. But yeah, the writing process probably started. I started early, around like May, because I was at home and I was like, you know, I'm just gonna bust it out and try to get as much of this done as possible. And I ended it, you know, sometime in November. And while I was doing that too, my teachers and part of the class were prepping me to like actually set up kind of like a press release for it, where I made like all these PowerPoints trying to like vouch for the story and all this other stuff. All these like papers explaining my decisions in the story, why I go certain routes with it, why I think this is a story worth telling and stuff. And I ended up acing the class, and I got my graduate degree. And that's my first ever screenplay in terms of writing in school. And let's talk about how it did in the real world. So I think this project could be shot under $1 million. Granted, it could be over $1 million too, but I think it's very localized for what it is. That said, I don't come from a rich family. I don't come from a family that has connections to the film industry. And I know absolutely nothing about the business of the film industry. And honestly, I hate the film industry, specifically the business side of it. That whole thing is just like, I don't work well with it. I get lost, I get confused, and I don't know how to like approach people and talk to them about it. So my whole thing was like, I did write up some query letters, but I didn't know who to send it to or how to get their attention. And on top of that, I was just like, well, the only thing I could probably do is do like a film festival run for the screenplay. So I submitted mostly through Film Freeway. I also submitted to the bigger festivals, but it was really obvious, I think, the more I look back at it. Granted, I did get help from my teachers and they gave me great advice. I just had no clue what the hell I was doing. And I was just like, oh, well, this looks like a good festival. I'll submit and stuff. And it was it was a learning experience. Before I go also into like the whole film festival side of it, I also got the script critiqued through some other script coverage websites, specifically We Screenplay. I did it for that screenplay and the other one I was working on at that time, and it was an interesting kind of duality where the one for Recidivism kind of acknowledged all the problems that did come with the screenplay. I think the biggest one, the more I'm looking at it, there's some things that are very underdeveloped, which I definitely need to work on in the future. But they mentioned that, like, oh, you could definitely tell more with the story. Because, again, like, I had that requirement that I couldn't go over 100 pages. And I do agree with that, but I think it got to a point where I was, like, kind of, like, burnt out because I was working on it for so long. I felt like it was a pretty good critique, and they had, like, their opinions on what to change and all this stuff. That one was pretty good. The other one I got for the other screenplay I was working on, it was really obvious that the reader didn't just did like a really rushed read through of it, mostly because the screenplay was over 100 pages. They have like a 72-hour turnaround, but I got it in less than 24 hours, and they had like a lot of spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, and they did this thing where like, well, this character did this, but they would name the wrong character. So it was obvious that like they just really rushed through it, and both screenplays got a pass. The first one for Recidivism got passed, and they like just were like, oh, this just isn't to my taste, but this could work in the way it is. And I was like, okay, that's cool, even though it still has issues. The other one was like, yeah, I don't know, it was a pass, but it was also very obvious that like they just rushed through it. And I wanted to contact like We Screenplay, I probably should have, and I probably could have made a good case, but that's a story for another time. So I did like the festival runs mostly through Film Freeway, but I also did like the big festivals like Sundance, the Academy, Nichols Fellowship. All like the big festivals, it did not go to the next round, and that's fine. That's understandable. It's worth kind of mentioning, I think, with like the bigger festivals specifically. The people that usually end up winning, they already have some sort of like writing credits to their name. Like they've either worked in television or they have those connections and stuff. So that was kind of like an interesting thing I've noticed, and I'm still gonna like submit to those because obviously those are like the big festivals, and I want to get some sort of notice. I think it just kind of like opened my eyes to how nepotism and connections really work in that kind of industry. And again, like I want to stress like my writing's not the best, but like it's an annoying factor of the film industry. The Film Freeway ones were more kind of like local festivals, but like I submitted to like the bigger cities like LA or New York City. Mostly I did a few in DC, I did some in Buffalo. So like out of all the ones I submitted on Film Freeway, I think it had like a 50% acceptance rate. And the ones that it was accepted to were I would either be like nominated for a few things or stuff. So I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I was a finalist in a couple, and I didn't like end up winning anything, which I'm fine with, because again, it's like my first ever screenplay. I was just trying to like get those kind of connections and stuff. The one kind of incident that kind of like shook me during this process, I had one festival where they nominated me for like a bunch of things, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, and that felt pretty cool, good. Hey, my writing got nominated for stuff. And they had this like acceptance. They had like an award show that they filmed. That was all like, it wasn't live, but it was like they filmed it somewhere and then they edited it and stuff. And they're like, well, it's like $20 to watch it. So I was like, yeah, cool, because I got a bunch of acceptances I got a bunch of nominations where I was like, yeah, this, I might win something. I'll check it out. And within the first 10 minutes, they read out the title of one of them, but they butchered the title. So what ended up happening was when they butchered it, the guy started like making jokes about the title and was like, oh, the writer shouldn't have picked that one. But like the joke just kind of like kept on going and going, and then like I lost. And then like it became obvious that I didn't win any awards, on top of them just like mocking me for a little bit. And it didn't help too that like the same guy who was the host who was like running it was also making comments like, oh, well, this winner donated a lot of money to us. And I was just like, well, fuck you, like. So it was just a weird festival that I will never submit to again because of that experience. I think it just like the whole kind of festival thing just kind of made me it just opened my eyes to how things are and stuff. I'm still gonna do it, but I think I'm gonna be like more smarter, maybe a little more relaxed on who I submit it to. And I think in the future I'm going to try to query more, try to raise money for these kind of projects. Kind of, the ones I've written so far have like they're going to be decently sized budgets, but I think it's the whole kind of connection thing I need to work on and try to like find those right people and stuff. While that was going on, I ended up trying to make a novel out of Recidivism, where I just pretty much took the screenplay, threw it into Word, and I ended up with like a 200-page draft of it. It's over 60,000 words. So I've never written a novel before. And this is my first ever novel, and it's weird because it works, but it doesn't at the same time, and it really just comes down to the fact that like I don't really have the experience writing novels. There's a lot of repetition, a lot of things I hate, but I think it's something I'm going to keep on working. I'm going to keep on writing the stuff that's very underdeveloped. I think I need editors and second pairs of eyes to help me out with the story, but we're just going to keep on trucking with it. And I think one day I can end up getting it published, but I need to like start spending money on like edits and stuff because I'm just at a point where I'm so burnt out and nothing is just connecting with me at this point. Like I'm very burnt out with the project and I need to work on some other stuff. And ever since then, even when I was like working on the festivals, more so last year, within the first 6 months of 2021, while everything was going on, I just wrote like a shit ton of stuff. And I've written some stuff in like the second half of 2021, but I've just been more kind of like, and it's mostly just like a whole burnout thing, but I've also had like, I don't know, life just got in the way. So it's kind of weird because like I really want to make writing something like a legit career, but at the same time I was just so exhausted, and which sucked. And it weighs down on me because I usually look into like those kind of stories of people, like I think of like Quentin Tarantino with like his kind of rise to it and stuff. Granted, he had connections later on, but I've had that thing where I'm 25 and it's like, well, should I have gotten to that point where something I made was published or made into a movie, which is the goal. And that stuff just kind of weighs down on me, but I know it's just more a fact of like continuing to work on yourself, your writing, work on more projects, get your name out there. And it's tough, but it's an issue of patience that I don't have. I need to work on that. And maybe one day it'll work out. I don't know. I've also realized I like kind of like started slumping down more than I spoke, but it is what it is. And yeah, I think just because I get wrapped up, I just wanted to talk about it. The second screenplay I was working on at that time, I'm currently putting out on the festival run. I need to come up with some query letters, but we'll see what happens. I'm told that one was pretty good. I'll just keep on working on it. And I need to make short films. It's been a while since I've done that, and I have some ideas that I want to do, which I might do later this year or next year. I don't know. I want to do creative stuff for a living, and hopefully it happens. One way you can make it happen is if you like and subscribe for more brutally honest stories. I don't know. Thanks for watching.